You always start over. Maybe it's the gym. Maybe it's a project. Maybe it's a channel you've abandoned twice already. Maybe it's something you've been trying to build for years. One day you start. Things go well for a while. Then something happens. Life gets busy. Your priorities change. You lose momentum. You get distracted. You disappear. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. And eventually you look at the thing you abandoned and think, great, I ruined it again. Now you're back at the beginning. Back at zero. Back where you started. At least that's what it feels like. The strange thing is that almost everyone has this experience. People disappear from the gym. They stop studying. They abandon projects. They leave businesses unfinished. They stop creating. They stop writing. They stop trying. Then one day they come back. And every time they come back, it feels embarrassing. Because returning forces you to face the gap, the weight you gained, the material you forgot, the unfinished work, the empty channel, the abandoned goal. Returning forces you to look directly at the distance between where you wanted to be and where you are, and that hurts. So many people make a decision without realizing it. They decide that because they stopped, they failed. And because they failed, they should stay away. The project becomes a reminder. The habit becomes a reminder. The goal becomes a reminder, not of possibility, of disappointment. So they leave, not for another week, not for another month, sometimes for years. The strange part is that the original mistake was rarely the thing that caused the real damage. Missing a week usually isn't what kills the habit. Missing a month usually isn't what kills the project. Taking a break usually isn't what destroys progress. The real damage often comes later. It happens when you decide that the break erased everything. Because once you believe you're back at zero, returning starts to feel pointless. Why come back if everything is gone? Why return if you have to start from scratch? Why reopen the project? Why restart the channel? Why go back to the gym? Why try again? And that's where one of the biggest misunderstandings about progress begins. Most people think successful people never stop. They imagine consistency as a perfect streak, day after day, week after week, month after month. No interruptions, no setbacks, no breaks, just constant forward motion. It sounds impressive. It also happens to be unrealistic. Real life doesn't move in straight lines. People get sick. They move. They change jobs. Life becomes complicated. Things fall apart. Momentum disappears. And sometimes people disappear with it. The question isn't whether you will stop. Almost everyone stops at some point. The real question is what happens after you stop. The answer sounds obvious. You start again. But anyone who has ever abandoned something knows it isn't that simple. Because returning feels different from starting. Starting is exciting. Returning is uncomfortable. Starting comes with optimism. Returning comes with evidence. Evidence of all the times you stopped before. Evidence of mistakes. Evidence of unfinished work. That is why returning requires something that starting often doesn't. Humility. You have to admit that you disappeared. You have to admit that you lost momentum. You have to admit that the perfect streak is gone. And for many people, that is exactly what keeps them away. They would rather imagine themselves succeeding someday than return imperfectly today, because imagination protects the ego. Reality does not. The strange thing is that most progress is built by people who return, not by people who never stop. Think about almost any long-term skill. Learning a language, going to the gym, writing, studying, building a business, creating videos. Very few people move forward without interruptions. Most people leave and come back. Leave and come back. Leave and come back. The difference is that some people treat every interruption as the end. Others treat it as a pause. That distinction changes everything. Because a pause can continue. An ending cannot. One of the most damaging beliefs you can have is the belief that every restart means zero. It usually doesn't. The person returning to the gym is not the same person who first walked into it. The person reopening the project is not the same person who first created the file. The person launching another channel is not the same person who uploaded their first video. Experience remains. Lessons remain. Mistakes remain. Even failure remains. You carry all of it with you. The only thing that disappeared was the illusion that progress would be effortless. That is why people often underestimate the value of failed attempts. The failed attempt was not useless. Neither was the abandoned project. Even the channel that never worked left something behind. At the time, it feels like wasted effort. Later, it often becomes part of the foundation. The funny thing is that success stories are usually told backwards. People point at attempt number 7 and call it success. They forget that attempt number 7 was built on attempts 1 through 6. The visible success gets all the attention. The restarts disappear from the story. But without those restarts, the success would not exist. What looks like persistence from the outside often feels like repeated failure from the inside. The person did not move forward because they never stopped. They moved forward because they refused to stay away forever. That is why I think people focus on the wrong skill. They focus on motivation. They focus on discipline. They focus on consistency. All of those things matter. But there is another skill that rarely gets attention. The ability to return. Because eventually, almost everyone leaves. Not forever, just long enough to wonder if coming back is worth it. The gym gets abandoned. The project gets ignored. The habit disappears. The plan falls apart. The excitement fades. And sooner or later, the same question appears. Do I start again? Most people think the answer depends on motivation. I don't. I think it depends on identity. Because every time you return, you are telling yourself something. You are telling yourself that the story is not over. The project still matters. The goal still matters. The person you wanted to become still matters. Even after the mistakes. Even after the delays. Even after the months you spent doing nothing. That is what returning really means. It is not proof that you failed. It is proof that you have not quit. There is a difference. A huge difference. Failure is an event. Quitting is a decision. People confuse the two all the time. They fail once and assume the story is finished. They lose momentum and assume everything is ruined. They disappear for a few months and assume they have erased years of progress. Most of the time, that simply is not true. The project is still there. The skill is still there. The lessons are still there. And you are still there, waiting for you to continue. Not from the beginning, from where you left off. That is why I do not think the opposite of failure is success. And I do not think the opposite of failure is consistency. The opposite of failure is returning. Returning after the bad week. Returning after the bad month. Returning after the embarrassing gap. Returning after everyone else would have quietly given up. Because every time you return, something interesting happens. You discover that the distance was smaller than you imagined. You discover that not everything was lost. You discover that the thing you thought was dead was only paused. And over time, those returns begin to accumulate. 1 return becomes 5. 5 become 10. 10 become a habit. And eventually, something strange happens. What felt like endless restarts starts looking like progress. Not perfect progress. Not linear progress. Real progress. Messy. Interrupted. Human. The kind of progress that actually survives real life. So if you feel like you're always starting over, consider another possibility. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're continuing from where the last version of you left off. The experience is still there. The lessons are still there. The failures are still there. Even the mistakes are still there. The only thing that disappeared was the illusion that progress was supposed to be a straight line. Most people do not succeed because they never stop. They succeed because they keep returning. Again. Until one day, what looked like countless restarts becomes a story that never actually ended.